I don't know how One Piece did it, but the Alabasta arc is the very best One Piece arc I've seen so far. Now I know I feel like I say that after every One Piece arc that this is the new best one, but it genuinely feels like the story only gets better and better the further it goes along. I was stunned seeing how this masterpiece of an arc brought together so many running story threads in a truly satisfying way. So without further ado, here's my review for the Alabasta arc. Even right from the start of the arc, you can feel the tension start to build as the entire nation of Alabasta is a ticking time bomb. And just when it seems like all hope has been lost for the people of Alabasta, Luffy and his crew makes their grand entrance to save the day. And something I've noticed is the more of One Piece I watch, the closer I actually have to pay attention, because even seemingly unimportant details seem to have big payoffs in the future. And I routinely find myself surprised and even pointing at the screen thinking like, oh, so that's what they were setting up, or oh, I forgot about that detail. But I must say, at the start of every One Piece arc, I love this feeling of so much potential in the air, so many directions the story can go, and even for this arc I had so many wild speculations, and almost all of them turned out to be entirely wrong. Even before arriving to Alabasta, I remember being shocked by this unlikely encounter with Mr. 2, one of the villains of the arc, and I was definitely more surprised by the fact that he became friends with the Straw Hats, even if it was a brief friendship. But I definitely didn't expect the amount of payoffs this brief scene would have at the very start of the arc, showing how important it truly was. But I remember the sense of tension I had as the viewer, knowing information that neither party knew in the story. So I was hanging on to every word or action in this brief encounter, knowing if you revealed too much it could come back to bite you. And seeing Mr. 2 steal their faces you knew would be a problem, or him revealing he could turn into the King of Alabasta you knew would be another major problem. But I gotta say, it was pretty funny the moment the crew realized after he had left he was Mr. 2. I love how proactive each of them were, by coming up with a way to prove that they were who they said they were. And I thought that this had one of the best payoffs at the end of the arc, one of my favorite One Piece moments I've seen so far, and I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about before I even have to say it. Now, upon reaching Alabasta, it was cool to see yet another terrain, obviously a very deserty terrain, kind of reminding me of Egypt. But I gotta say, I love how One Piece goes above and beyond with each of their locations, trying to make it feel like a real place, with the real culture, real people, a real sense of history like it's a living world. Now, I did find it interesting to see that Vivi was a little less decisive and a little off when she first arrived to Alabasta. To me, it felt like reality was hitting her once again now that she's back home and how dire the situation truly was. But I must say, I love this moment when the crew reaffirms that they are with her till the end, and I thought that this was just a heartwarming moment from an interesting group of pirates. Luffy and his crew have almost become more of revolutionaries to me than typical pirates, but then again, the Straw Hats have never been your typical pirates. Now, of course, Luffy got up to his usual chaos, which was pretty funny to see, such as him getting lost. But I like how One Piece reintroduced a couple of things that it had set up in previous arcs. The first being Smoker and the Marines arriving in Alabasta looking around for Luffy. This was honestly a reunion I was pretty happy to see. And then the other thing it brought into the story was this mysterious figure it had set up at the end of the previous arc who was looking for Luffy. That, of course, being Luffy's brother Ace. Now, I must say the scene where Luffy, Ace, and Smoker all collide, literally, was one of the funniest things I've seen in One Piece. Of course, a chase ensues, and eventually Luffy is rescued by his big brother Ace, and I love this reunion. Now, briefly, I wanted to comment on Smoker, since I really like Smoker as a character. Even from Logtown when he was first introduced, I couldn't help but like him. Although he was definitely an adversary to Luffy, he still seemed to be an honorable character whose motivations just clashed with Luffy's. But I love the way that this entire arc really paid off my love for Smoker's character, particularly with a few moments with him and Luffy and their semi-alliance in this arc. Now, before getting into the real main plot points of the arc, I definitely wanted to briefly touch upon Ace. Since I thought Ace was a great character, I basically immediately loved him. And I could tell he was Luffy's brother seeing them interact because they were similar, but he also had characteristics associated more so with an older sibling, such as his strength, but he was also more responsible than Luffy. To be fair, that's not exactly a high bar. Now, Ace's Devil Fruit abilities were honestly the coolest I've seen so far in the series. But I love how Ace introduced us to other pirates in the world, even if it was only their names, such as Whitebeard or Blackbeard. Now, I don't know exactly what this is setting up, but it feels like it's going to be big if I know anything about One Piece so far. Now, the major plot points of the arc are really kickstarted when Vivi and the crew come to the decision to head to Yuba so that she could meet with the rebel leader who she was a childhood friend with and convince him to stand down. Now, I like how this connection between those two adds in more layers and mystery into the story, like why would one of Vivi's friends be leading the rebellion? And these are only questions which are answered as the story goes along, but I like how it set up some of this intrigue early on. And I definitely give the arc a lot of credit for really establishing the geography of Alabasta, reminding the viewer where each of the pivotal places were at each opportunity it got, by showing maps, but even more so by showing the journey it takes to get there. You don't simply teleport between locations, but you actually have to make a long trip. You gotta plan for it with provisions and all sorts of things go into this. But the more detail you put into things like this, the more it feels like you're living in a real world. Now, it was nice to see Ace tag along for a little bit in the desert journey, but it definitely felt like he was a little out of place, which makes sense after learning this was really an anime-only journey. Ace left them in the manga way sooner, but some of the extra time and scenes with Ace I thought were pretty cool, but it also made sense that he would leave them. After all, it's Luffy and Luffy's crew's adventure, and having Ace there really didn't make much narrative sense. After all, he'd probably be too strong for this point in the story, and their victory wouldn't feel nearly as earned. Now, the desert journey in totality was pretty great. Sure, it had some filler episodes. I don't mind the filler because I really like soaking into the world of One Piece as much as possible. But I like how this journey really showed the devastation caused by Crocodile and how much the country had changed for the worse. Now, I also wanted to briefly mention Karoo the Duck, who I thought was great in this arc as well. He is truly a member of the crew, but he would leave the crew for a large part of the arc because he delivered some very valuable information to the king. But I gotta say, I love the way the king responds to this information, knowing that it's Crocodile who's the true enemy now. Because instead of worrying about the rebel army and defending the palace, he decides he's gonna give all of that up. He's gonna take his army and go and confront Crocodile in Rainbase. Imagine the shock learning a warlord of the sea and a hero of the nation was trying to bring down that very same nation. Now, speaking of Crocodile, I like how One Piece had mostly left his character a bit of a mystery up to this point. But finally, they would truly reveal who this character was in the secret meeting with Crocodile and the numbered agents. Even they didn't really know who their boss was. But I was just on the edge of my seat watching this meeting, seeing how Crocodile would interact with each of his agents, and I thought that this was a masterful way to truly introduce the villain. I mean, sure, he had some scenes up to this point, but never a true introduction in my opinion. But when Crocodile revealed his identity, it was great to see how he interacted with each of the agents in front of him, because he would display how in command of the situation he was by using subtle or even sometimes very obvious threats. You could just tell that he felt like he was fully in command of the situation. Not only that, but he displayed how intelligent he was as a villain, but also how diligent he was when it came to planning and carrying out those plans. He is a truly great villain, the best I've seen so far in One Piece. Now, I must say there was a little wrinkle in his plan when Mr. 3 showed up, and he kind of flustered Crocodile a little bit, because in that moment Crocodile realized that the Straw Hats were very much still in play. But he got to show how ruthless he was, mummifying Mr. 3, showing off that devil fruit power, and then feeding him to his gators. I mean, talk about a villain introduction. But I liked how Crocodile still treated the Straw Hats as a real threat. Now, maybe you could argue he underestimated them, but he at least adjusted his plan to take care of them. Even coordinating with Mr. 2, realizing Mr. 2 had come across them, seeing all of their faces, and this even set up something that would definitely be paid off later with Sanji, because in all of the previous encounters with the Baroque Works agents, Sanji was always off to the side. So you just knew that there would be a payoff with Sanji and the Baroque Works agents, but you wondered how it would come about. Now, I briefly wanted to talk about this Vivi flashback since I thought it was very insightful, particularly with Vivi's relationship with the rebel leader Koza, learning how he had protected her and this bond that they had formed, but also learning about Koza's dad Totto, which I thought was a fascinating contrast between the father and the son, because on the one hand, Koza represented someone who had lost hope and turned against the king, because he had been manipulated like a lot of people into thinking the king was keeping all the rain for himself with dance powder, whereas his father Totto represented someone who had remained faithful, never giving up hope in Alabasta and its leaders, knowing something else was responsible for the lack of rain, and truly believing once it rained again, the fighting would stop, and boy would those words ring true. Now, I really loved the moment when the crew arrived to Yuba and they saw what was once a prosperous oasis turned into a barren wasteland, with only one man left, that of course being Totto, never losing hope and just diligently digging day after day. Despite the fact that Crocodile kept sending sandstorm after sandstorm, Totto remained faithful. And in a surprising turn of events, I love this connection Totto forms with Luffy of all people. As he's tirelessly digging for water, Luffy realizes how important this is to Totto and he learns about his dream. And that's something about Luffy. If he thinks you're a good person, he'll do everything in his power to help you achieve your dream. And he helps Totto dig for water, and Totto ends up getting a little bit of valuable water which he gives to Luffy. And if that wasn't heartwarming enough, seeing Luffy and the way he treated this water, Luffy, who is a character who is pretty careless when it comes to a lot of supplies like food and water, he realizes how valuable this water is and treasures it. And I love that this little bit of water turns out to be a major plot point in bringing down Crocodile. But something else that Vivi's flashbacks revealed was the character of King Cobra, who at first I definitely doubted, like, is this guy as pure intentioned as Vivi thinks that he is? Because it definitely seems plausible that Vivi might have been blinded to some of the stuff her father was doing. However, this backstory definitely cleared up the fact that no, the king was indeed a good guy. He was trying his best to be a great leader. But to be honest, King Cobra in particular made me think of a lot of philosophical questions, such as, what does it mean to be a great leader? Because surely, being a good person at heart and wanting what's best for your people is great, but it doesn't really mean anything if you lack the power to actually protect those people from outside forces. But to me, a leader like Luffy, who's sure he has his faults, but he represents some of the stuff that King Cobra is missing, particularly the strength to actually protect the ones that you love. Something I thought was kind of stressed by Luffy and Crocodile talking was the fact that Vivi and to an extent her father are too optimistic about things, and sometimes you need a leader who's willing to get their hands dirty like Luffy. And speaking of getting your hands kind of dirty, I mean Luffy does it, maybe in a way I wasn't really expecting, in the middle of the desert, because now that they're on their way from Yuba to the rebel base, Luffy stops and he's just concerned, like, why don't we just go after the main head of the snake? Why don't we go and beat Crocodile? Like, we're going all around trying to find the rebel leader, and we may not even be able to convince him to stop. Why don't we just go and take out the true villain? And him and Vivi obviously have this back and forth with kind of a crazy turn of events when they start actually getting into a fight with each other. I don't really even know what to say about this other than, yeah, that's Luffy for you. But despite Luffy's methods, I like that everyone acknowledges Luffy has a point and Vivi listens to him because she genuinely trusts Luffy and what he thinks, and she trusts his ability to beat Crocodile. Now, after a long journey through the desert, the crew finally arrived at Rainbase where Crocodile was located, and I've got to say, I love the fact that nothing goes according to plan and pure chaos ensues. It felt very on brand for the crew. Luffy running into Smoker in the bar was one of the funniest moments of the arc, especially with how he spat something in his face for the second time this arc. I mean, Smoker can't catch a break. This obviously created a chase with Luffy and his crew running from Smoker, only for them to fall perfectly into Crocodile's trap, which was definitely annoying to see how gullible Luffy was. But a large portion of the crew is now trapped with Smoker in Crocodile's cage. And this was not at all the first meeting I expected between the crew and Crocodile, and quickly, the situation began to feel quite hopeless. Especially when Miss All Sunday takes out Pell, Alabasta's strongest soldier, captures Vivi, dragging her in front of Crocodile, the man trying to steal her kingdom, and had caused her all this pain. It was tough to see Luffy helpless behind bars while Crocodile toyed with Vivi, giving her a false choice to either save her friends or go and run to the capital and try and stop the rebellion. Because that rebellion, which was already growing, reached its boiling point when Crocodile captured the king, had Mr. 2 impersonate him, really riling up everyone to go and attack the kingdom. I mean, I felt really bad for the king and really annoyed how everything was falling perfectly into Crocodile's plan. I wanted nothing more than for Luffy to get out and give Crocodile a beating he would never forget, but everything was in Vivi's hands at this point. And Vivi quickly realized Crocodile was never going to let her go, and she tried to do everything in her power to save her friends. But the scene definitely created some perfect tension as Crocodile was filling the room with water while a gator was trying to eat Vivi, so this situation was incredibly desperate. Not only that, but Crocodile pretended to have a gator swallow the real key to the cage, of course knowing that even if they got the key it would never open up the cage, so a dire situation somehow felt even worse. And you have this very satisfied Crocodile walking away, and to his credit, it seemed like the perfect plan. Everything was in line. At least everything he knew about, which is a callback to Sanji, aka Mr. Prince, because I love this payoff for the fact that Sanji is basically the only member Baroque Works didn't know anything about. So of course when he called Crocodile and was toying with him, reminding him of the conversation he had on Little Garden where Sanji got the best of him, it was basically the perfect bait. The fact that Sanji got the better of him before was enough to kind of toy with Crocodile's emotions to get him to at least go and try and capture Sanji and end this for good. And what seemed like a Hail Mary worked out to perfection as Sanji, the prince, he shows up and rescues the damsel in distress and, you know, the rest of his crew. Beats up the gator with the key, but again, it's not a real key, so it doesn't matter. And it seems like their situation is going to be hopeless because it was never a real key. That is until someone else Crocodile had underestimated pops up. That, of course, being Mr. 3, which Crocodile had discarded before. But one thing that definitely comes back to bite Crocodile at multiple points is underestimating people's resolve. He threw away Mr. 3 and Mr. 3 encased himself in wax, surviving for just long enough to come back to bite him. He will make the same mistake with Luffy multiple times and it will come back to bite him. But I love how just in the nick of time they get Mr. 3 to make a wax key, getting them out right as the room is filling with water and they all swim to the surface to safety. And this moment where Crocodile comes back to the room is just perfect. It was one of the funniest moments to me because you just have Crocodile very confused looking at a knocked out Mr. 3, his gator is also knocked out, all of the straw hats are gone, and he's probably thinking, how did this even happen? And I must admit, this moment where the crew has swam to the surface is one of my favorites of the whole arc, because you have a very confused Smoker who was about to drown until he was saved by ZORO. He's confused, he's asking ZORO, why did you save me? Only for ZORO to reveal it's because his captain told him to. And I love this moment for a few reasons. One, it shows how loyal ZORO is to Luffy, to the point where he'll even do something Luffy commands him to do against his better judgment. But more so, I love this moment because it shows how Luffy can turn adversaries like Smoker, a marine who definitely hates pirates, into alliances and sometimes friends. Now, I wouldn't go so far as to say Smoker is a friend of theirs, but Smoker is genuinely grateful, so against his better judgment, he lets them go. And I really appreciated this brief moment Smoker and Luffy were just looking at each other, and they kind of had a mutual understanding, like, I don't agree with you, but I can respect you. Now after this, we get a very big moment where the crew, they're trying to race back to the capital city, obviously to stop the rebellion before it happens, where Crocodile tries to get Vivi and Luffy kind of throws himself in as a sacrifice and says, go ahead, don't worry about me. And I love the fact that the crew trust him enough, knowing that, yeah, Crocodile is strong, but we trust our captain here. Now, I didn't really think Luffy was going to be able to beat the villain at this point in the arc, since it's not really late enough in the arc where it seemed fitting, but I didn't expect the fight to be as one-sided as it truly was. It felt like Crocodile was toying with Luffy for a large portion of this fight. Which makes sense because Luffy literally couldn't touch him, which is a problem I like that they brought back into the story for Luffy to overcome, because it's not really a thing Luffy ever really figured out when he fought Smoker back in Log Town. He just kind of got lucky and ran away. So I like the fact that he has to actually face this problem head on. And even in this arc, I don't feel like he fully figures out a way to really overcome it. More so just a temporary fix with the water in his blood, so I imagine there's another level to this. But this fight was definitely tough to watch at certain points with how easily Luffy was being tossed around, and no matter how hard he struggled, he just couldn't hurt Crocodile. And the fight basically culminates in Crocodile stabbing Luffy with his hook. Now, I didn't think Luffy was ever going to die in the fight because, well, he's the protagonist and there's still plenty of story left. But at the same time, I kept wondering, like, okay, how is he going to get out of this? I didn't really expect it would turn out quite like this, but I gotta say, I love that all it took for the eventual downfall of Crocodile was a few drops of water from Yuba that Luffy had received, because this allowed Luffy to grab Crocodile, even if it was only for a second, but that told him all he needed to know to be able to eventually beat him. So of course Crocodile thinks he's won and he just throws Luffy into the quicksand pit, discarding of him, which is another big mistake he made. I thought that this was the same mistake he made with Mr. 3, just assuming that after he had dried him up and thrown him to his crocodiles that was the end. But he underestimates the willpower of people. Now Luffy definitely got some help when Miss All Sunday showed up, or as I learned her real name, Nico Robin showed up. I didn't really expect she would be the one to save Luffy in this situation. I thought maybe it would be Pell or someone like that, and Pell definitely comes in and helps. But this encounter was fascinating, not simply because she saved him, but she was fascinated about asking him about his name, particularly the initial D, which definitely got me thinking like, oh, what does it mean? Especially because she's using it almost in the context of like a savior complex. Not to mention some characters of the past have that initial, so you figure it has some relevance, like Luffy's brother when his name was introduced, Portgas D. Ace, or in the last arc when Dr. Correa revealed that his name wasn't Gold Roger but Gold D. Roger. So that's another connection the King of the Pirates and Luffy has, is the initial D, so I'm wondering like, okay, what does it mean exactly? I imagine it will be answered in time. Now I definitely found the next part of this arc very interesting, especially with the perspective that I already knew Luffy had lost the Crocodile. The crew is carrying on like he probably won, but they don't really know for sure. But seeing them kind of formulate this plan as they're approaching the city to kind of divide up the Baroque Works agents, I thought that that was very well done, especially because it gave each of our crew members a unique fight tailored to them. And everything seemed to be going to plan, with Vivi left on her own with the massive rebel army riding towards the city. All she had to do was signal to Koza, with the hopes of maybe getting him to stop the attack. But as the army was getting closer and closer to her, you couldn't help but feel like something was gonna happen, and turns out I was right, because then somebody fires a cannonball, causing all sorts of dust and confusion, and Koza can't even see Vivi. And Vivi's voice cannot be heard, which becomes a major theme of this whole arc, is Vivi feeling like nobody can hear her. Of course, learning that was one of the undercover Baroque Works agents, which becomes a major problem with the battle as you got these Baroque Works agents inciting the war on both sides. And I remember being filled with such a sense of dread, like, oh, this is going to happen, people are going to die. And all of this is because of Crocodile's manipulation. And it was tough to watch as this massive citywide battle unfolded. Now, I've got to give Karoo a lot of credit for protecting Vivi despite how badly he got trampled on, but I like how this next moment pays off an earlier encounter, particularly with Mr. 2, because it seems like Usopp has shown up until you realize like something's a little off when he tells Vivi just leave that bird, which again, Usopp would never say something like that about Karoo because Karoo is, you know, an integral member of the crew basically. So she knows something is up and she asks Usopp to prove himself, and I didn't even expect this next part, because I genuinely thought that the bandage was the only way of proving yourself. So when Mr. 2 impersonating Usopp, and I knew it was Mr. 2 when he held up that bandage as a way of proving himself, I genuinely thought Vivi was about to be tricked here. Only to see the shock in her face when she realized it's not him. I love the hidden detail that it wasn't about the bandage, it was about what was under the bandage, the X. And even that will have a bigger payoff at the end, which I can't wait to talk about. But I definitely thought that was a nice misdirect because they kept the audience in the dark there. So this of course creates a citywide chase where Karoo, and again, I give Karoo a lot of credit because he is beaten, bruised, and battered, and he is carrying Vivi as far as he can into the city. So while Vivi is trying to stop the battle, I like the fact that we get to focus on these individual battles between each of our crew members and the Baroque Works agents. And all these fights feel pretty integral to their character development. But one element I definitely like is in the back of my mind, I know Luffy is going to show up. However, I like the fact that this battle was only focusing in on the city. It's not worried about Luffy. You kind of know he's on his way, but at the same time, I like that the focus isn't on Luffy here. It's on the crew members, it's on the city, it's on each of these fights happening here. Now I want to take a moment to talk about these individual fights. And I want to start with Usopp and Chopper versus Mr. 4 and Miss Merry Christmas. But I love seeing the teamwork between Usopp and Chopper, especially because Usopp got to use his lies and his craftiness actually to his advantage here. But I gotta say, one of my favorite moments of the entire arc comes when Miss Merry Christmas, who I found very annoying in this fight, tries to break Usopp and Chopper's spirit by telling them Luffy is dead, which to the best of her knowledge, she genuinely thinks he is. But a tearful Usopp in that moment when things seem very dire and grim, I love the fact that he truly believes in his captain, and he says Luffy can't be dead because Luffy is the man who will become king of the pirates. Seeing a character like Usopp, who is more known for his cowardice, mustering up the courage to believe in his captain despite the situation was truly great to see. And I found many points of this fight to be kind of funny, but seeing them overcome these two was pretty great to watch. Now Sanji versus Mr. 2 also was kind of a funny fight to watch, especially with Mr. 2 using Sanji's inability to hit a woman, so Sanji kind of had to think of ways of overcoming that. But even during this fight, especially with the way it ends, it never felt like Mr. 2 was the same kind of villain as the other Baroque Works agents, which I guess was kind of setting up a future moment at the end of this arc. Now Nami versus Miss Doublefinger was also a great character development fight, since Nami isn't really associated with getting involved with these fights, so it was kind of interesting to see this side of her, but I definitely have to say this whole fight was hilarious. Seeing Nami try and use Usopp's creation to beat Miss Doublefinger was pretty funny, especially with how it wasn't really working out for her at the start. Now she got the hang of it eventually, but it was kind of funny to see how upset she would get with just some of the random party tricks this device would create. But I definitely liked Nami's fighting style with this weapon, especially because it incorporated her knowledge of the weather and really just strategically outwitting your opponent, which definitely seems more in line with Nami. Now Zoro versus Mr. 1 was also a great fight. I mean, it was truly inspiring. Because much like Luffy versus Crocodile, with Zoro versus Mr. 1, both were strong fighters, but it seemed like Mr. 1 was unbeatable because how could Zoro cut something that couldn't be cut? Now sure, it might be a little generic to shonen, but I always appreciate the moment when the hero is on the brink of defeat, and they gain a little power up in that moment on the brink of death, which helps them overcome the villain, and it felt like that was the moment here for Zoro, where he was pushed to the brink, and in that moment he realized, either I'm going to learn how to cut through Mr. 1 in this moment, or I'm going to lose. And seeing that shot of Zoro cutting Mr. 1, finally defeating him, and just that image of a bloody, beaten Zoro, was so satisfying to see and one of the coolest scenes of this arc if you ask me. So after each crew member had handled their individual challenges, we shift into the major conflict of the arc. In particular, we see Princess Vivi. She's reached the palace, she decides she's gonna blow up the whole thing in a desperate attempt to stop the war, and of course Crocodile shows up and stops even that. And from Vivi's perspective, you could tell that that little shred of hope she had is vanishing right before her eyes. It genuinely feels like Crocodile has won. But I gotta say, I wasn't expecting this secret motivation by Crocodile, where he reveals he's after a poneglyph, which will lead him to this nation's great secretive weapon Pluton, which had me questioning everything about the world of One Piece, like there being this hidden information about powerful weapons of the past, making me wonder about like advanced ancient civilizations. But really more so, this showed me Crocodile was a much greater villain than I had given him credit for at this point, because I realized what he was after was not a mere nation, but the tool to bring the entire world under heel. And if that's not bad enough to really show the magnitude of this villain, we quickly learn that there's this ticking time bomb about to go off, which will destroy the city, killing basically everyone here except Crocodile, showing just how little he cared for his agents and his followers. So this only adds to the mounting sense of tension with a literal ticking time bomb, and Crocodile here genuinely believes he's won, and I can't really blame him for thinking that. He doesn't know about Luffy still being in the picture, and his whole plan is contingent on Nico Robin here being loyal enough to him to translate the poneglyph and tell him about the weapon Pluton. However, I realize that this is the major problem of Crocodile, which is that when you're this cold-hearted guy with no loyalty to anyone, you inspire no loyalty either. So Nico Robin was never truly on your side. But without knowing that, you wouldn't even factor in that she would save Luffy, and that she would basically foil your entire plan. Now there was a small moment when it seemed like, okay, maybe you could at least get everyone to safety when Koza arrives at the palace, realizing in that moment he's been tricked. And I could kind of feel for the guy because sure, he made a lot of mistakes, but at the same time, he was being heavily manipulated. And Vivi and him, they try and do their best to get the armies to stand down, but of course, you just know it's not going to work. Crocodile has too many men on both sides. They rile up everyone again. Everyone continues to fight on both sides, and I just felt so bad for Vivi here. Because here she's realized she's not going to be able to save her country, and Crocodile is laughing at her, he's mocking her, and he grabs her, holds her over the palace wall, and he says, "You will never be able to save your country," and he lets go. To Crocodile, he had won. And I must admit, this next moment is one of my favorite One Piece moments I've ever seen. Because here you have this satisfied Crocodile, Vivi is falling to her death, and you just know he forgot to factor in one massive thing, that of course being Luffy. And seeing Luffy swoop in with Pell in the nick of time to save Princess Vivi and continue the fight he had started with Crocodile was perfect. I mean, just seeing that look on Crocodile's face in this moment was enough for that beatdown Luffy had taken before to be fully worth it. And one of the funniest things I've ever seen in One Piece is every time Crocodile thinks Luffy is dead, only for Luffy to turn up again, and Crocodile just became more and more horrified. Like, why won't this guy just die? Now there's this very brief heartwarming moment where after Luffy has caught Vivi from falling, when she's pleading with Luffy for help, it definitely reminded me of Nami in Arlong Park asking Luffy for help, and crying and telling him no one can hear her voice. And I thought Luffy had the perfect response, showing why I love him, and also kind of showing why he's a great leader. Because he says very calmly to her, "Don't worry, we hear your voice." And her smile is just perfect because Luffy is the strength she needed in this moment. Now I love this brief moment when the crew realizes, okay, so Luffy's still alive, like we kind of believed he was, but it's nice to get that affirmation that he's definitely alive. And it's cool to see how they divide up responsibilities, like everyone else will go and search for the bomb. Luffy, you only focus on Crocodile, that's your singular focus, and Luffy's definitely more prepared this time because he's brought his water. And just seeing this moment where Luffy launches himself up at Crocodile, who, by the way, thinks he's invincible at this moment, like he's not even really bothering to try and block Luffy's attack or anything. And seeing Luffy actually punch him and send him flying was one of the most satisfying moments I've ever seen in One Piece. Seeing a guy who believes he's invincible get a beat down is perfect. And I love that as King Cobra is watching all of this, his reactions are just hilarious because he's looking on at Luffy like, who exactly is this guy? Like, he's kind of strange, but what he's doing is working. I don't know how, but this is unbelievable. In many ways, it reflects my reactions to watching Luffy like, I don't really understand what he's doing, but it's working, so I'm gonna let him do it. Now Miss All Sunday has King Cobra lead her to the poneglyph, so they leave, they're off screen for a bit, and although Luffy is definitely doing better in this fight, there were some pretty funny moments with like Water Luffy and different things like that. He eventually gets defeated yet again. Now he has some pretty quick thinking by firing up the water, and sure, is it a little silly and might I have to suspend some disbelief? Yes, but I also feel like it's kind of fitting with the goofiness of One Piece at times. So this was yet another time Crocodile thought he had beaten Luffy, and he discards him, only for Luffy of course to be saved by the water he fired up. So Crocodile made the same mistake yet again. However, I think it's actually quite fitting with Crocodile's character because He tends to be quite arrogant. Sure, he plans things out and he's more intelligent than a lot of the villains in One Piece, but sometimes that arrogance and believing he's so far above people actually leads you to make the same mistake multiple times. Meanwhile, the other crew members, they find the bomb, and it's kind of a funny sequence. Now, eventually, Vivi is the one that's sent to the top where she stops the cannoneers. However, I gotta give Crocodile credit since he definitely planned ahead. He had backup plans for his backup plans, since he had rigged the bomb to go off either way with the timer. And you know, aside from underestimating Luffy, I've gotta hand it to Crocodile for being a truly great villain. So the bomb is definitely gonna go off, and I just love this scene with Pell, where he makes this emotional sacrifice to take the bomb way above the city, knowing it's going to kill him, and as the bomb explodes over the city, he has protected everyone else. I thought it was a perfect moment. Now I must admit it was kind of ruined by the fake out death and realizing Pell survived, and it's not at all that I didn't want Pell to survive, but it also doesn't make sense and it cheapens the sacrifice. If I had one major problem of the arc, it was some of the fake out deaths. But anyway, let me get back to the Crocodile moments, because Crocodile reaches the poneglyph and he wants to learn about Pluton. However, in this moment he realizes his whole plan was basically foiled because Nico Robin refuses to tell him what's actually on the poneglyph. And this is the moment their partnership ends, when Crocodile tries to kill her. So at this point, things aren't going great for Crocodile, but they immediately turn from bad to worse when Luffy shows up yet again, and this moment where you just see true fear in Crocodile's face is perfect. He doesn't understand how Luffy keeps turning up. He's probably looking at him like, what are you, a cat? How many lives do you have? And this ensuing final clash is a perfect conclusion where Luffy didn't show up with any water, just his bloody fist and determination. I'm not even sure he knew that the blood would work. I just think he was gonna turn up regardless and fight this man. And they're fighting, and Crocodile is even resorting to cheap tricks like trying to poison him, but even with a bloody, broken, and poisoned Luffy, he still refuses to give up. And seeing Crocodile turn from very arrogant to just petrified of this man Luffy in front of him, who will not give up. It doesn't matter how broken and bloody he gets, or how much poison is in his system, he will not give up. And Crocodile should have realized it was all over the moment Luffy declared, "You can't defeat me. I am the man who will become king of the pirates." I must admit, every time Luffy says that in a major battle scene, I just get chills. And Luffy ends this fight by sending Crocodile up through the city bedrock with a ferocious punch. I mean, he had to lift buildings to get him through this bedrock, up way into the sky, ending the battle for good. And just seeing that moment of Vivi and the crew realize what Luffy had done, that Luffy kept his promise and had beaten Crocodile, was just so perfect to watch. However, even with the city saved from the explosion and Crocodile defeated, the conflict was not over. The armies were still fighting, and Vivi is breaking down as she can't stop them because her voice can't be heard. A very tearful Vivi is crying and sobbing, and it's hard to watch her just pleading with everyone to stop, to listen to her, but nobody can hear her. However, in a very fitting conclusion, with Crocodile defeated, the rain finally comes down, echoing Totto's belief that the rain will fall and the fighting will stop. His words could not have been more true. And it was great to see that after it started raining, after years of drought, the people on both sides of this conflict were stopping the fight, and the air was literally clearing, allowing people to see their surroundings clearly. And just this brief moment of peace didn't necessarily mean that the fighting wouldn't continue. However, it gave them the opportunity to see their princess, and it gave Vivi the opportunity to finally be heard, and an entire nation listened to their princess, and I just loved her impassioned speech to them. And seeing this conflict finally end was just so satisfying. Crocodile had been defeated, the fighting was over, and the rain had come. Now, I like this brief moment where we see Smoker, what he had kind of been up to, where he sees the Baroque Works ship, which was manufacturing dance powder, allowing the Marines to actually properly charge Crocodile with a crime, sending him to jail. So that was nice that Smoker was doing some pretty valuable stuff off screen. Now, unfortunately, it was interesting to learn that the world government gave Smoker all the credit for taking down Crocodile, which to his credit pissed him off, but it really made me realize that the world government seems to be a lot more corrupt than I was even thinking. It's not like it's just a few bad Marines here and there, it seems like the world government will do anything to toe the bottom line. Now, after all of the fighting in these next few days, it was kind of cool to see just some of these lighthearted moments as the crew was relaxing, but of course the crew realizes they've got to leave, and so they got to go and pick up their ship. They give Vivi a little bit of time to decide if she's going to join them, if she's not going to. But I gotta say, I didn't expect Bon Clay to help out the crew escape as much as he did, quite literally becoming a sacrifice himself, ensuring that the crew would be able to escape. I thought it was a nice payoff for their earlier friendship and a little bit of a way to redeem himself. And something else I wanted to quickly mention was the new bounties that they got. Luffy's 100 million really makes it seem like he's come a long way. Now Zoro's 60 million was interesting. I do feel like Sanji deserved at least a little bit of a bounty already. I just felt like he's a little left out, especially because he's done a lot when it comes to fighting for the crew. Now the pivotal moment came when Vivi would have to finally decide if she was going to join the crew or say goodbye, and it seemed like One Piece might have been going for a bit of a fake out decision when Vivi came down to the shore, and it seemed for a moment like maybe she would join the crew, but honestly I thought she made the right decision by telling them she was just here to say goodbye, that she would not be joining their crew. And although it was tough to say goodbye to Vivi because over this whole saga I became very connected with Vivi, she felt like a member of the crew, but at the same time her dream doesn't really align with the life of a pirate. Her dream was to save her kingdom and be a great ruler of her nation, so it really felt like her place was in Alabasta. But I still have to say this scene was still so emotional and basically broke me, because in perhaps the most fitting goodbye to the arc, with the crew realizing that they couldn't acknowledge Vivi with the Marines looking on, that image of the crew holding up their arms, showing the X's, proving their friendship was the perfect way of saying goodbye. And I must admit, I already miss Vivi on the crew. She just felt like she naturally fit in, but I also understand the decision to have her stay in Alabasta. Now I will say, while Vivi's dream doesn't really align the most with the life of a pirate, I feel like this leads in perfectly to the final conclusion of the arc, which is Nico Robin joining the crew. Now I've mentioned this in the past, but even from the introduction of Miss All Sunday, I remember seeing her in images with the crew, so I kind of knew like, okay, she's probably going to join the crew one day. I didn't expect it would be quite this way, and she basically explains that because Luffy saved her, now she has to join the crew, which is kind of funny logic, and it's even funnier that Luffy agrees with that logic, but I imagine in time she'll fit perfectly into the crew. It definitely does feel a little awkward at first, like she was kind of a villain for a large part of the arc, but I gotta say, even learning about her dream, how she basically wanted to find the lost history and share it with the world, I think that actually perfectly fits with the crew. In totality, I thought this was the best One Piece arc I've seen so far, and I'm really excited to see where the story can go. There seems like so much potential, but if you enjoyed this video, please take a moment to hit that like button, and if you aren't subscribed, please consider subscribing. I just post reviews for the anime I watch, but thank you for watching.